She's still inside you. There are echoes inside us that have nothing to do with time. They do not age. They do not fade with distance. They do not grow quiet just because we've learned to be. You may be 30, 50, even 70 years old, living continents away, long past the childhood home, long past the conversations, the holidays, the tension, the longing. And yet, her voice is still there. Before you speak, it whispers. Before you act, it cautions. Before you choose, it questions. And before you dream, it doubts. She's still inside you. Whether your mother is still here or has passed on, whether she was nurturing or emotionally unavailable, strong or broken, present or absent, her psychological presence didn't end with your childhood. It didn't even end with your last goodbye. Because her voice no longer lives in her body, it lives in yours. It lives in your nervous system, in the way your shoulders tense when someone disapproves, in the way your voice softens when you fear rejection, in the way you shrink yourself to avoid being too much. It lives in your choices, your habits, your inner monologue. It lives in your relationships, the way you bond, the way you break, the way you abandon yourself just to be loved. And unless we become conscious of this internal force, we begin to mistake it for our own voice. We call it intuition. We call it wisdom. We call it just how I am. But Carl Jung, one of the most influential voices in modern psychology, knew better. He called it the mother complex. And in his depth psychology, this wasn't merely a dynamic between you and your mother as a person. It was far more profound. It was a psychic structure, a set of emotional blueprints and unconscious beliefs embedded deep within the psyche, formed in early life, and rarely questioned. Jung taught that this complex doesn't just influence your personality. It shapes your soul's architecture. It becomes the scaffolding around your desires, your fears, your need for approval, and your resistance to freedom. And unless you confront it consciously, it will define your fate. As someone who has studied, written about, and coached others through the lens of human behavior, philosophy, and Jungian archetypes for more than 30 years, I can tell you, this is not just theory. This is lived experience. This is the invisible thread that connects you to the past, to your lineage, to generations of women and men who never had the words or the safety to name what was happening. The mother complex is not just about your mother. It's about what she carried. It's about what she couldn't hold. It's about what you inherited silently, and what still echoes every time you hesitate to be yourself. You may not hear her name aloud, but you feel her every time you doubt your worth, every time you feel guilty for saying no, every time you sacrifice your truth to keep the peace. Jung believed that until these unconscious structures are brought into the light, we are not truly free. He famously said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." And so, in this moment, we pause. We take a breath. We begin the journey, not away from her, but into the mother within. Because healing does not begin with blame. It begins with awareness. It begins with the quiet courage to turn inward. And it begins with the radical decision to rewrite the story she left inside you. Let's begin. Carl Jung, the founder of analytical psychology, taught that the human psyche does not come into the world as a blank slate. Rather, it is born into what he called the collective unconscious, a deep, timeless reservoir of inherited psychological structures and symbols that every human being shares. Among these powerful archetypal forces, one of the most influential, and often the most complex, is the mother archetype. To Carl Jung, the mother was never just a person. She was far more than a role or a relationship. She was a symbolic force, an energetic pattern woven into the very fabric of the human soul. In Jung's framework, the mother is both the nurturer and the destroyer. She is the one who gives life, but also the one who can suffocate it. Jung called her the Great Mother, and she shows up not only in our personal stories, but across cultures, religions, myths, and dreams. She is the embodiment of creation and protection, but also of engulfment and control. When we are children, the mother, or whoever served as the maternal figure in our early life, becomes our first and most formative mirror. It is through her gaze that we first come to understand whether we are safe, whether we are worthy of love, whether our needs are too much or just enough. Through her presence, we begin to form our sense of self. Through her absence, we begin to question it. And yet, as Carl Jung repeatedly emphasized, this experience does not fade when childhood ends. The mother's emotional imprint does not dissolve when we grow up, move out, or even after she passes away. Jung warned us that the emotional patterns established in our earliest relationships become internalized. The image of the mother is taken into the psyche and continues to live within us, not just as a memory, but as a psychological structure. Jung called this internal image the mother imago, and he believed it was one of the most powerful complexes in the human psyche. This internal mother becomes a kind of silent compass, shaping how we see ourselves, how we speak to ourselves, how we connect with others, and how we define our value and identity. According to Carl Jung, this internalized mother complex does not simply reflect our literal experience of our mother. Instead, it becomes a symbolic representation, a synthesis of memories, emotions, expectations, and wounds that operates beneath the level of our conscious awareness. It becomes the lens through which we interpret the world, often without even knowing we're doing it. And unless we examine that lens, it becomes the silent architect of our fate. Jung believed that the mother complex could take many forms, depending on our early experiences. For some, it might manifest as an overbearing inner critic, always telling us we're not good enough, not doing enough, not being enough. For others, it might show up as a deep, invisible guilt whenever we try to separate, assert boundaries, or live life on our own terms. Some may find themselves repeating painful relational patterns, being drawn to emotionally distant or overly controlling partners, not because they choose to suffer, but because the psyche is unconsciously trying to resolve an old, unresolved wound. Carl Jung was clear that the weight we carry is not only our own. He famously wrote, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parent." He understood that we don't just inherit eye color or mannerisms from our mothers, we inherit their unspoken sorrow, their suppressed anger, their unfulfilled dreams, and their unprocessed grief. These are the emotional legacies passed down through generations, often without a word being spoken, and yet they shape our inner world as if they were our own. Jung emphasized that unless we bring these unconscious dynamics into the light, we remain bound to them. He believed that without conscious examination, the mother complex becomes a psychic loop, a story that we relive over and over again, mistaking it for reality. He urged us to recognize that our suffering is not random. It is symbolic. It is the psyche's way of alerting us to something that was never integrated, something within us that is still living in the past. To Carl Jung, the path to freedom did not lie in blaming the mother nor in idolizing her. Rather, it lay in seeing her clearly, both as a fallible human being and as the vessel through which an ancient archetype moved. Jung urged us to stop viewing our mothers solely through the narrow lens of childhood grievance or idealization. Instead, he invited us to step back and see the symbolic dimension, the deeper patterns at work. Only when we do this, Jung believed, can we begin the sacred task of individuation, the process of becoming fully ourselves. Individuation, as Jung defined it, is the integration of unconscious material into conscious awareness. It is the moment we stop living someone else's story and begin to live our own. But the first and most critical step in this process is recognizing the mother complex, not just as a chapter of our past, but as a living force within our present. This was Carl Jung's warning. If we do not become aware of the internal mother, she will unconsciously guide our choices, our relationships, our inner dialogue. We will live our lives reacting to a voice that isn't truly ours. We will sabotage our own expansion to maintain loyalty to a mother who lives not just outside us, but within us. Carl Jung's wisdom continues to shine light on this most intimate and complicated of psychological truths, that the relationship we have with our mother is never really over. It continues in the depths of our psyche, shaping the way we relate to ourselves and the world, until we choose to face it. Section 3. The Shadow Mother, the Devourer Within. One of Carl Jung's most courageous and groundbreaking contributions to psychology was his exploration of the shadow, those hidden, suppressed parts of ourselves that we disown, reject, or are too afraid to face. Jung understood that true psychological growth could only begin when we turn toward our shadow, not to fear it, but to integrate it. And within the domain of the mother complex, one of the most difficult and painful shadows to confront is what Jung and later Jungian analysts have described as the devouring mother, or what we may call today the shadow mother. The shadow mother is not the loving caregiver or the gentle guide we might remember from childhood bedtime stories. She is not the mother who soothed you, but the one who silently instructed you to stay small. She is the internalized voice that warns you against being too bold, too loud, too successful, or too free. Her messages are subtle but powerful, often disguised as concern or morality. She whispers, "Don't speak too loud. Don't dream too big. Don't ever leave." According to Carl Jung, this internal voice is not simply a memory of childhood, it becomes a psychic possession, a self-contained force within the unconscious mind that clings, manipulates, and controls. Jung believed that the shadow mother does not operate logically or even maliciously. She operates through emotional inheritance and unconscious loyalty. And perhaps most dangerously, because she is cloaked in the energy of motherhood, an archetype associated with love and sacrifice, we often feel guilt, shame, or confusion even when we attempt to name her. You might feel guilty for setting boundaries with a parent who says they only wanted the best for you. You may feel shame for wanting more than your mother allowed herself to have. Or you may sabotage your own success, not out of incompetence, but from a subconscious fear that thriving means abandoning her or being ungrateful for all she sacrificed. Carl Jung wrote extensively about this type of energetic entanglement. He observed that until this internal figure is made conscious, we do not live from our authentic center. Instead, we live under the influence of an inherited fear, often mistaking it for our own instincts or inner truth. Jung emphasized that these shadow forces are not just psychological, they are symbolic. The shadow mother, in particular, can become the internal jailer that keeps us from stepping into our full potential. But here's the profound paradox that Carl Jung illuminated. The shadow mother is not just the one who imprisons you, she is also the one who guards your transformation. She is not simply the enemy to flee from, she is the threshold you must cross. She is the dragon guarding the treasure, and in the language of mythology and depth psychology, it is the hero's journey to confront this dragon, not to destroy it, but to reclaim the gold hidden beneath her fear. That gold is your voice, your joy, your autonomy, and your freedom. But to reach it, you must first face the shadow mother within you, not with hatred, but with courageous awareness. As Jung taught, the shadow must be met, not avoided, because only in that meeting can transformation begin. Section 4, Individuation, Becoming Your Own Person. Carl Jung called the journey of becoming your true self individuation. It is one of the most central concepts in all of Jungian psychology, and it refers to the ongoing process of separating from the unconscious roles, projections, and inherited identities of the past in order to emerge as a sovereign, whole individual. Individuation is not about rebellion. It is not about rejecting your mother, nor cutting ties with your roots. It is about differentiation, about recognizing the influence of the mother complex within you and choosing to step out of its shadow. It is the sacred act of saying, I honor where I came from, but I choose where I'm going. Or even more powerfully, I see you, Mother, but I no longer belong to your story. Carl Jung warned that many people live their entire lives under the spell of the mother complex without ever realizing it. These individuals, though physically grown and independent, remain psychologically tethered to an unconscious ideal or emotional debt. They live as obedient children in adult bodies, afraid to offend, afraid to disappoint, afraid to live fully. They may appear responsible and high-functioning on the outside, but on the inside, they hesitate before speaking, they shrink from risk, and they live with the constant, unspoken question, am I allowed to be fully myself? Jung emphasized that real separation is not physical, it is psychological. You can move across the world and still feel her grip. You can change your name, your profession, your lifestyle, and still carry her expectations in your nervous system. You'll know you've entered the path of individuation when guilt arises every time you thrive, when you panic at the thought of asserting your needs or drawing a boundary, when you notice that you're holding yourself back, not because of what the world demands, but because of what your internalized mother might think or feel. Carl Jung famously said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." And this is the pain of individuation, the pain of confronting the false self that was created to maintain love, loyalty, and peace. But Jung also taught that this pain is sacred. It is not the pain of destruction, but the pain of birth, the birth of the authentic self. To individuate is to step into the mystery of your own life, to make choices not from inherited guilt or expectation, but from deep alignment with your inner truth. It is to become the author of your own myth. And it begins when you choose not to stay in the story you were given, but to write a new one. Section 5. Rebirth, Healing the Inner Mother. Carl Jung offered one of the most radical and liberating truths in modern depth psychology. You cannot wait to be mothered anymore. If you want to be free, if you want to become whole, you must learn to mother yourself. This does not mean rejecting the idea of the mother. It means reclaiming her energy within you, not as a voice of criticism or control, but as one of compassion, protection, and creative power. The inner critic that once mirrored your mother's disapproval, that voice must be transformed into one of encouragement and gentleness. The guilt that once haunted every attempt to grow, that must be replaced with permission, and the feeling of not being enough, that must be met with unconditional self-compassion. Jung taught that true healing does not come from external validation, nor from trying to change our parents. Healing happens when we turn inward and begin to develop a new relationship with the internal mother, what Jung called the positive face of the mother archetype. This means reimagining her not as the shadow that shames us, but as the sacred inner force that nurtures us. Importantly, Jung did not suggest that we destroy the mother within. Instead, he encouraged us to dialogue with her, to humanize her, to see her wounds, her limitations, and her humanity. By doing so, we stop making her larger than life, and we reclaim our emotional sovereignty. This internal reckoning is not abstract, it is deeply felt. Jung described it as psychological alchemy, the transformation of the soul through symbolic death and rebirth. The false self, the one that was built to please, to perform, to survive, must die, and in its place, the true self is born. This is not poetic metaphor, it is the reality of inner work. Jung saw this rebirth as the turning point of individuation. In time, you stop living as someone hoping to be chosen. Instead, you become someone who chooses. You begin to move through the world with quiet authority, not trying to prove your worth, but simply embodying it. In this rebirth, You stop seeking a mother in others. You become your own source of love, wisdom, and care. You become free, not from your past, but from its unconscious control over your present.